All right, let's jump right in. When we think about civil liberties in the US, it's easy to picture this fixed list of rules, like they're carved in stone. But the truth? It's way more dynamic than that. It's really a constant, high-stakes debate, a balancing act between our individual freedom and what's best for society. And to really get it, we're not going to start in some dusty old courtroom. We're going to start on a modern college campus.
So, let me just ask you this straight up. Should your money be used to support a cause or an idea that you find totally offensive? It's a tricky question, isn't it? And this isn't just some random hypothetical. This exact dilemma landed a major university right in the middle of a Supreme Court battle over the First Amendment.
So here's the deal. At the University of Wisconsin, every single student had to pay this mandatory activity fee. And that money was used to fund all sorts of different student groups on campus. But then, some students took a closer look and realized, wait a minute, my money is going to groups with political views that I completely disagree with. So they sued. They argued it was a violation of their freedom of speech to be forced to financially support ideas they didn't believe in. This clash on campus is really the perfect way to get into our topic today. Because these messy, complicated, real-world fights, that's exactly how our civil liberties get hammered out and defined over time. It's not about some abstract theory. It's about navigating these competing interests.
Okay, before we go any further, let's make sure we're all on the same page. What are civil liberties? Well, they're the constitutional protections we have against the government. Think of them like a shield. For the most part, they're laid out in the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. But, and this is a huge but, that shield wasn't always as big or as strong as you might think.
Yeah. See, the Bill of Rights came with a major catch. The people who wrote it had a very specific target in mind, and that simple fact creates a massive twist in the story of American freedom.
Just look at the very first words of the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law. Notice that word, Congress? The founders wrote the Bill of Rights to put limits on the new federal government and only the federal government.
And this leads to a pretty shocking reality. In 1833, a Supreme Court case called Barron v. Baltimore made it official. The Bill of Rights did not apply to state or local governments. I mean, think about that. Your state could, theoretically, trample all over your freedom of speech, and the Federal Bill of Rights gave you zero protection. So, the huge question became, how do we fix this?
Well, the answer, the tool that would completely reshape American freedom, didn't come until after the Civil War. It was the solution that would very slowly, piece by piece, apply the Bill of Rights to every single level of government in the country.
The real game changer was the 14th Amendment. It created this legal concept called the incorporation doctrine. Basically, the Supreme Court started using a clause in the 14th Amendment to say, hey, states, you're bound by most of the Bill of Rights too. This was the mechanism that finally nationalized our civil liberties.
But, and this is wild, it didn't happen all at once. It was this slow, gradual process that unfolded case by case for nearly 100 years. Just look at this timeline. Freedom of speech wasn't applied to the states until 1925. The rule against illegally seized evidence, 1961. And the Second Amendment's right to bear arms, that wasn't incorporated until 2010. It just goes to show you, our rights have been an evolution, not something that was just handed down from the start.
And that brings us right to the heart of what we're talking about today. Civil liberties are not absolute. The courts are in this constant process of performing a balancing act, weighing our individual freedoms against other important values. And the best way to really see this in action is to look at some of the specific fights the Supreme Court has had to settle.
Okay, take the classic tension between free expression and public order. On the one hand, you have Texas v. Johnson, where the court said burning the American flag is a form of symbolic speech and it's protected. Now, that's deeply offensive to a lot of people, but it's protected. But on the other hand, in Schenck v. United States, the court made it clear you can't just say whatever you want. Speech that creates a clear and present danger, the classic example is falsely yelling fire in a crowded theater, that is not protected. Two cases, two different lines drawn in the sand.
And it's pretty interesting to see how Americans view this balance compared to people in other democracies. When you ask if religious extremists should be allowed to hold public meetings, just over half of Americans, 51%, say yes. Now that might not sound like a huge number, but it is way higher than in Britain or France. It shows this really powerful, even if it's sometimes uncomfortable, commitment to free expression here in the US.
Let's check out another balancing act, the rights of the accused versus the power of the police.
The exclusionary rule, which came from Mapp v. Ohio, says that if police seize evidence from you illegally, they can't use it against you in court. The whole point is to protect our Fourth Amendment rights. But it also means that sometimes a person who is clearly guilty might go free on what some people would call a technicality. That's a direct trade-off right there.
And of course, there are the famous Miranda rights. You've heard these on TV a million times. These warnings from Miranda v. Arizona are another crucial balance. They protect a suspect's right against self-incrimination by making sure they know they can shut up and get a lawyer. It puts a limit on police interrogation tactics to make sure individual rights are protected. You see the same kind of balancing act when it comes to freedom of the press versus a person's reputation. In the huge case New York Times v. Sullivan, the court set a really high bar for public figures who want to sue for libel. It's not enough to prove a story was false. They have to prove the publisher acted with actual malice, meaning they knew it was false or just didn't care. This protects robust and, even sometimes mistaken criticism of our leaders.
So all of this leads us to this fascinating paradox. On the one hand, our civil liberties are a check on government power. They limit what the government can do to us. But at the exact same time, we need the government to actively step in and protect those very same liberties for us. It's a double-edged sword, and it's right at the heart of our democracy.
And now, we get to maybe the most controversial balancing act of them all. I want you to go search the Constitution, search the Bill of Rights. You will not find the word privacy anywhere. So, does that mean we just don't have a constitutional right to it?
Well, in the landmark 1973 case, Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court said yes, it does exist. They argued that several of the amendments, when read together, imply a fundamental right to privacy. And they used that implied right to establish a woman's constitutional right to an abortion. But even then, it was a balancing act. The court said that right had to be weighed against the state's interest in protecting potential life. This case, and its eventual overturning, is probably the ultimate example of this difficult, ongoing, and evolving debate over our rights.
So let's pull all this together. What are the big takeaways? First, our civil liberties aren't some fixed list. They are a constant, dynamic balancing act. Second, the Bill of Rights didn't even apply to the states at first. It took the 14th Amendment and a century of court cases to change that. Third, in this process, the courts are always weighing our individual freedoms against societal needs, like public order. And finally, that creates a central paradox. Our rights both limit government power and require government action.
And all of this leaves us with one final and honestly massive question. These conflicts between what one person wants and what society needs are inevitable. They're never going to weigh. So the real question we have to ask ourselves is, who should have the final say on where we draw that line? It's something to really think about, because that decision, right there, shapes the very nature of our freedom.